Hello and welcome to another episode of Crowe Corner. I'm Alfon, Managing Director at Crowe Consulting and Head of Risk and Governance. Our aim is to help our clients make the most of risk and regulation and make decisions that are consistent with their business objectives and become more resilient. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Sukhraj Takhar, who's going to talk to us about his role as Chief Control Officer at Direct Line. Before we dive into that, Sukhraj, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us briefly about how did you get there?
Thank you, Isaac. Good to see you again. I'm the Chief Controls Officer for Direct Line. I've been doing the role for about a year and a half, just over a year and a half, but have always worked across the sort of three lines of defence. I've done third line roles, I've done a Chief Risk Officer role. So this is my first time doing a kind of risk role within the first line, and we'll talk a bit more about that. But I've also worked in practice as well, so sort of first 10 years of my career in a sort of Big Four environment. So yeah, that's my broad experience.
Great. So let's start with a very simple question. What does a Chief Control Officer in an insurer do? Can you provide us with a simple overview of your role in Direct Line?
We're still figuring that out a little bit. No, I mean, it's really first line risk management. It's not a 1B role, as I know it gets a little bit of negative attention, but it's very much providing risk management as a service to the first line. So we don't own risk, we don't oversight risk. That's very much the second line of defense. But we're really supporting exec owners to understand, support, manage, mitigate risk, all that good stuff. So that's broadly what the purpose of the function is. I think the name controls, that can throw people a little bit because it sounds like a narrower role than it potentially is. And I think the only reason we used controls rather than risk is not to confuse the role with the Chief Risk Officer or the risk function. But I definitely see it very much as a first line risk function, but not to own risk, providing risk management as a service to the business.
That's very insightful. Now, let's move then briefly into the wider business and risk management processes in Direct Line. How does the Chief Control Officer fit into that?
Yeah, so Direct Line, has had a reasonably mature three lines of defense model for a number of years. Ran into some challenges, as lots of big companies do. So we ended up with, risk management activities, people, processes, capabilities dotted around, spread out across the first line. So the logic of creating a CCO function, as we call it, was really to bring that together under one roof. And we did it initially to accelerate our progress against some regulatory sort of challenges and objectives. But having got through that, I think there's a lot of value you can get from centralizing first line risk activities and processes. So things like RCSAs, control testing, risk reporting, et cetera, et cetera. So it also can bring efficiency and raise the bar in terms of executing risk management in the first line.
Okay, but I guess in every other business decisions, there are advantages and disadvantages. Can you unpack that a little bit for us, obviously in the case of a Chief Control Officer?
I think the biggest advantage in my mind is, and somebody else said this to me once, is risk management is a craft. It's something that is quite technical and requires a certain amount of skill. And I think centralizing it in the first line is a really good way to sort of bring that consistency, raise the bar, create a bit of an identity around risk management in the first line. And I think what that brings lots of benefits. It brings better conversations. It increases the professional development of risk managers in the business. And you can also be a bit more coordinated in terms of how you develop the risk management maturity of the first line itself. So I think, your ability to focus more deliberately on people, capabilities, making sure there's the standardization and consistency in how you think about your risk management sort of framework, your control environment, Risk reporting as well. So lots of risk people spend a ton of time in PowerPoints or Word documents. So you can really leverage technical capability, risk systems. You can start to do some of that stuff, which I think reduces the sort of admin or brawn, as I call it, brain versus brawn. It's like that sort of administrative element of risk management you can really optimize and make more efficient. And then you're spending a lot of money on risk management resource, and it gives them the space to actually do what they should be doing, which is being really close to the business, really immersing themselves in the operation of the businesses and trying to get their hands on what could go wrong, helping business leaders to understand that, deploy the risk management framework. Quite often risk management frameworks can be a bit theoretical, but when you're out on the coalface, trying to sort of make it happen almost on the ground, really road tests your framework as well. So there's lots of benefits, and I think as a risk management professional, it's been a great opportunity to actually build new things, to design some things that we weren't doing in the past. So it's a fantastic thing to do, and I think as a risk management, sort of discipline, I think more companies will start to think about it, particularly once you get quite large. The expectations are always increasing on risk management professionals, as you know. So it's a great thing to do, and I think we've in a short space of time, we've provided a lot of value to the business.
That's great, Sukhraj. But can we also unpack a little bit what might be the disadvantages of the role here?
I think two areas to watch out for. One is ownership of risk in the first line. I think once you create a chief controls office, you can almost put a target, right, to say first line risk sits here, and I think you really want to avoid that. First line should always own the risks. So I think there's many ways of doing that. I think the way we've tried to tackle that is the correct sponsorship of all of the first line risk partners in the business. So all of our risk partners will be sitting on the kind of leadership teams of the exco areas, and it's very, very clear in those forums, that the exec is owning the risk, and it's encouraging the sort of teams underneath to own the risk rather than the CCO function. So I think that's one common thing to watch out for. The other thing is, I think, blurring of the lines potentially between what the CCO is doing and the risk function in the second line. And the challenges there are, to the business, the uninitiated business, they just see risk people. And, it can sometimes, if the CCO function and the CRO and the risk function are not crystal clear on the division of responsibilities and accountabilities between the two functions, that can then manifest in the business. So I think it's really important to be clear on who is doing what between the CCO function and the risk function.
Okay, that's very interesting. So, but what about the CRO? He's a peer, your peer at the executive level. How do you manage that clarity about responsibilities?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the relationship between the CCO, Chief Controls Officer, and the CRO is critical for this to work. And I think, you need to have an aligned view on what good risk management looks like. And there needs to be a very constant feedback loop. Sometimes the CCO function might be pushing in the right direction, the risk function might be pushing in the right direction, and if you're not careful, the attention becomes between the two, right? Really, I think, having the luxury of having a CCO function and a risk function in an organization gives you a lot of boost to your risk management firepower. So I think, making sure that the two collaborate really well, and not just at the CRO and the CCO, the Chief Controls Officer level, but actually in the underlying teams. Okay. So they're going to the business as a bit of a united force, and being clear on, the oversight role or the advisory role that risk might play versus that sort of supporting the business owner's role that CCO is trying to do in discharging their responsibilities. So in theory, you can talk about it, but when you then deliver that service to the business, you've got to be very consistent in how you do that across the teams.
You make a great point there about the constant feedback. So this is not something you fixed today forever. It's something that you have to keep working on. So thanks for that insight. I guess at this point, some listeners would be wondering if this role can work for other insurers. What are your thoughts on that?
If you look at all of the big banks, they all have chief controls officers. They've been in place for a while now. And most of them put them in place for similar reasons that Direct Line did. Ran into some regulatory challenges, wanted to accelerate the maturity of first line risk, and therefore you centralized risk management into a CCO role. So there's many models that you can do. So you can have a fully centralized model like we do. So we have first line risk partners who have dotted lines into their respective execs, hard lines into me. Then you have centralized services such as control testing, risk reporting, running RCSAs, et cetera, et cetera. So all of that is, and risk event management as well. So those things we've centralized as well. So at the moment we're fully centralized, but again, depending on the maturity of your 3 lines of defense model and what your business requirement is, you can have different models for CCO, part decentralized, fully centralized, or a mix of both. So I think advice to other insurers would be like, be clear on why you want to create a CCO function. And it shouldn't just be about dealing with the regulatory problem, because that can become quite short term. And that's some of the challenges we've had at Direct Line is, thinking of it in a little bit too short term nature, I think, because if you just do that, then it's as soon as the regulatory problems are done, you disband and you're back to where you were before. So I would think more strategically about it, to think, okay, what are you trying to achieve? How is risk management going to help you in achieving your business objectives? And then thinking about your whole 3 lines of defense model and saying, how do you then structure a CCO function to either fill capability gaps, let's say in second or third line, or capability gaps in the first line, right? So you're almost doing a bit of a 3 lines racy, across your 3 lines of defense model, and then designing it in that way. So that's quite important. I think you also need to think about your people and capabilities. You can, as I said, you can upskill existing capability by centralizing it and improving standards. But it's also an opportunity to actually bring in new capabilities, which comes to my third point. A piece of advice is about investment. So you really need to put money behind the objective, right? So you can't transform first line without the right required investment. So Direct Line, we've had that. We've put money into bringing in the new risk people, money into technology, into risk reporting, all that good stuff. So I think you definitely need to put the right level of investment in it as well.
So that's a great summary. Purpose, people, and investment. That's been a great conversation, Sukhraj. I think I've learned a great deal about the role of the Chief Control Officer. Thank you also for listening to another episode of Crowe Corner. If you have any questions about what we've been discussing today, please reach out. Thank you.